Hello folk, how you doing? Scotty. So I was recently asked a question by Philip Zhang relative to socialism. Hey Scott, usually when I debate communists or socialists and bring up the argument of countries failing, they usually bring up these arguments. Number one, those countries were not true socialism. Number two, Western interventionism caused the downfall of those countries and socialism wasn't allowed to prosper by itself. Number three, they mention countries such as Bolivia or Yugoslavia that did better under socialism than capitalism. I'm not exactly sure how to refute these points since there aren't a lot of resources online for this, so I was wondering if you could debunk those points if you have time. Thanks, and your videos are awesome, by the way. So first of all, I would like to obviously thank yourself, which is a very kind thing to say about my videos and stuff like that. I know a lot of you guys have passed that kind comment and I greatly appreciate it a lot. So when it comes down to the first point, the thing that you need to understand is you're never going to get through to these people. Socialists are honestly religious of their ideology. They're cultists. Their ideology comes first and foremost over everything. Forget the fact that millions of people lost their life. What it's really all about is their ideology. The theory of socialism. To give you an example, and I've pointed this out before, with George Bernard Shaw, for example, these Western pilgrims, and they would show up in these regimes during the period of its honeymoon phase. And of course, in the first phase is the honeymoon phase. That's the phase where socialists go to these regimes and, boast about it and call it democratic and boast to the rest of the world, oh, this is a beacon to the rest of the world, look how wonderful socialism is. In the Soviet Union at that time, you had 70,000 odd people held in these labour camps. And how these Western pilgrims, these socialist sympathisers, painted those people in the labour camps. They painted them as happy, peaceful people. The Soviet Union, even in the 1930s, was a dictatorship. It was totalitarian, and those 70,000 people were massacred. And of course, you would see the Holodomor, etc., etc. When it comes to these people, and just like these regimes in history, and this is real world history, in other words, whenever socialism failed, whenever a problem occurred in the economy, the central planner would look for a scapegoat. They would get wiped off the face of the earth simply because they needed to find someone to blame it on. Why? Because their ideology means more to them than those lives at risk, right? They don't care about the lives. What they care about is protecting the name of socialism. Identity politics, where they throw around these names and they call you a Nazi, they call you a fascist, they call you a white supremacist, they say you're a racist, etc., etc., right? Is to say that if you support capitalism, if you support basically the private sector, they'll call you a Nazi, they'll call you a racist, they'll call you a fascist, right? They'll call you a white supremacist. It's to try and scare people from supporting such a position. But the danger behind that, it will always lead down the road of dictatorship when moving on the road towards socialism. You will end up finding a lot of people being brutally killed, and they would justify their death based on the fact that, this person supports capitalism, they oppose socialism, therefore they're a white supremacist, let's kill them. And that's why, time and time again, it always leads to mass graves. Joseph Stalin himself, and even Vladimir Lenin, had a name for these people. They called these Western socialists useful idiots. Because that's exactly who and what they are. Because they don't understand socialism. They honestly are that deluded, that far removed from reason, they think that socialism can avoid totalitarianism. Because they just don't understand reality. Everything to them is based on theory, right? That's it. This is where the whole thing comes from, where they say, oh, but that wasn't true socialism. Your idea of true socialism is workers' ownership of the means of production. But then you ask them the question, where is your example of a socialist economy with your workers' ownership of the means of production? Oh, that's right, you haven't got any. What you've got, however, is workers' co-ops that exist within a structure involving capitalism to a varying extent within a mixed economy. Now, you're dealing with people who will try and do everything that they can to redefine socialism in all sorts of ways, because this is what they did throughout recorded history. These people are very good at trying and attempting to change the language of socialism. They have an emotional investment and an emotional attachment within socialism. So going back to Kristian Niemietz's book, Socialism, the Failed Idea That Never Dies, he touches upon the three phases. The first phase being the honeymoon phase, the second phase, the whataboutery phase, and using up all the excuses, go on about, what about the United States of America, what about this and what about that. They try to divert attention away from the actual issue. That's what they did with the likes of Venezuela. They do it each and every single time with each and every single one of the regimes. Now, Cuba is very unique. And the reason why Cuba is unique, as Kristian Niemietz points out, is because Cuba was stuck between phases 2 and phase 3. Now, most socialist regimes entered the third phase. And the third phase is basically where they would go completely silent, and then they would distance themselves and say, oh, that wasn't true socialism, or that wasn't socialism at all. Noam Chomsky is the perfect illustration of this. There's no such thing as democratic socialism. There's no such thing as libertarian socialism. It doesn't exist. Just as there's no such thing as market socialism, because the definition of a market, as you can see here, is relative to capitalism. They try to relabel it in every way they possibly can because socialism's been an abysmal failure. That's what it is. When it comes to the likes of Noam Chomsky, you can see here he is saying one thing during the period when Venezuela was socialist. He's saying, oh, here it is, a beacon to the rest of the world, oh, look how wonderful socialism is. Even during that time period, you still seen the food shortages as early as 2003. And then later on, Noam Chomsky says this. And that is exactly what I mean, folk. In order, again, to protect the name of their socialism, they would try and repaint everything. Where they couldn't completely get rid of the market, the likes of Noam Chomsky decided to, repaint it and say, oh, well, it was state capitalism. It's just dishonesty. All it really is socialism in practice. That's what state capitalism is. It's socialism in practice that could not get rid of the private sector completely, could not, get rid of, the market completely. There's a world of difference between theory and practice. And the reason why they try to use the name state capitalism is to brainwash you. It's basically just a term used to condition you, to make you believe that it's somehow the fault of capitalism. Why? Because they're trying to protect the name of their religious ideology that means more to them than the millions of people who lost their lives. They don't actually care about the real world of what actually happened and all the failure. All they're caring about is protecting their precious ideology. It's a bit like Smeagol in Lord of the Rings with the Ring. That's what socialists are like with socialism. A reasonable-minded person would be able to sit and see right through socialism. A reasonable-minded person can only get so far. Something just doesn't add up here. I don't feel right, it just doesn't seem right, and they start to question things for themselves. Yuri Bezmenov, if you haven't heard of him, look him up. He even tells you this himself. You're never going to reason with them. Why do you think I don't bother debating them? It's a waste of time. You're dealing with people who move the goalposts constantly. What's the point trying to argue with someone who basically tries to redefine absolutely everything? And the reason why they do it is because they know they can't rationally defend what socialism is. And the only people who will listen to you are people with common sense. The very type of people who might have gone down the road of socialism to some extent are able to sit there and think to themselves, this just doesn't seem right, there's something that seems wrong. Those type of people you might be able to get through to. But to proper socialists, you can forget about it. That is to say that even when it boils down to this whole thing, where you see all these identity groups that they use, the victimised groups, such as, for example, what the left play at. They use gay people, black people. You hear it with all this LGBTQ and all the rest of this nonsense, all the transgender and all, etc., etc. The left like to use these groups, and they use them to try and further their agenda of socialism, to push for, in the name of equality. That's what it's all branded under. In the name of solidarity, socialism. Equality, fighting for equal rights, etc. All in the name of fighting for social justice. What they're basically saying there is the fact that they don't actually care about black people. They don't give a shit about, that of gay people. They don't give a shit about that of transgender people. Truthfully, they don't. The truth is, they're just using them as a platform to further their agenda for more socialist policies. That's the true face of them. And how you can tell that is because the moment a transgender person or a gay person or a black person comes out in favour of conservatism or libertarianism and favours capitalism, just watch the reaction that they get. They want these groups to look at capitalism as the great big evil. That's their goal. Oh, that wasn't true socialism. Or, oh, it just hasn't been tried and tested in the right way yet. Oh, we just need, we haven't found the right benevolent dictator yet. So on to the second point, and this goes on to the narcissism. Now, if you analyse narcissism, the narcissistic personality disorder, which is basically sociopathy, I think. Narcissistic personality disorder, they're very good at basically projecting the blame off elsewhere. Everything is all the fault of someone else. It's never their own fault, right? It's all projectionism. It's all the fault of someone else, never their own fault. Because in each and every single one of these failed socialist regimes, and it wasn't like there was one or two of them. You went from the Soviet Union, to that of communist China, to that of what you saw in North Korea, to that of, the failed regime in Albania, to the failed regime. Everywhere that socialism has been, you've seen the same repeated pattern over and over and over and over in a near endless cycle, to the point it's laughable that these people could even come out with such bullshit. It's like I said, folk, these people have never touched an economics textbook in their life. I could not, recommend this enough as I have. It's a good starting point. Even get to understand even the first section. You would understand why socialism is irrational, right? Anybody that's got the time to sit down and actually spend time learning, they would see right through it. Because the first section touches upon, of course, relative to prices. Just look at Chile. Right? With the price and wage controls, etc. Socialists are so unreasonable, so irrational. They actually think they can argue with you relative to price controls. So they say, oh, but that wasn't the reason why they faced the food shortages, that wasn't why they were facing all the problems with regards to socialism. Oh no, it's something else. It's the big bad United States of America. It's all their fault. It's all the fault of the United States of America. It's always the United States of America's fault, because, it's the big bad Americans. It's never the fault of mass socialism. It's always the fault of the American people. Fantastic. They tried that one with Venezuela, folk. It was just like this mouthy infidel, and I didn't even bother with him after that. But basically he came out and said, the United States of America got, Saudi Arabia to ramp up oil production, and it caused an oil collapse, and all of a sudden there was a food shortage. Jesus Christ, man. I mean, the reason why that's so deeply flawed is because during the oil boom, between that of 1998 right up to 2008, when the oil boom was there, the food shortages began and the blackouts began. So what's their excuse now? Oh, that's right, there's always some form of excuse, because you want to know what, folk? They don't like the truth. And you want to know what that truth is? The food shortage problem immediately followed the price ceilings imposed by the government. And that is socialism. This is the issue, and they try to control everything because they're not happy with market-driven prices, which is relative to capitalism, basically. And socialism has to have its presence somewhere. How else do you think you reach communism? You have to introduce socialism into the economy to some extent. You could turn to whether it was the housing shortage in the United States of America during the Second World War, or the shortage at the pump in 1974, or the shortage at the pump in 1978 in the United States of America. Or you could, it doesn't matter where you look, you'll find that government's price controls has created these problems over and over and over in a near endless cycle, yet despite that very fact, they still refuse to accept reality because they've never studied basic economics. You only need to study what price floors and price ceilings cause. You only need to study these things to basically understand why socialists are irrational. There's no debating that fact. They don't understand basic economics. Friedrich von Hayek was absolutely spot on when he said, if socialists understood economics, they would not be socialists. And that's the truth. Chile in the early 1970s, through all the price and wage controls, there they would follow all the problems, and as a result of barely having a private sector left running the printing press, they would face those problems. Some of these people are so far removed from the real world that they think they can just have a moneyless based economy, and as if people are just going to accept that bull. And let's say they do say, well, okay, I support, paying people wages, and it sounds like that of second thought. Okay then, so you're going to get rid of the private sector. How then are you going to pay for all the public sector wages then? How are you going to pay for the public sector? Because the only way that you can pay for it is the printing press. Are they honestly trying to tell you that they can finance the economy off the back of the printing press? Whether it's on the economic calculation problem, the knowledge problem that they're faced with, or it's down to an issue where, they can't finance the economy off the back of the printing press. What leg have they got to stand on? So when they turn around and say to you, oh, it's all the evil United States of America's fault. It's all their fault. It's their fault for all the intervention, they got involved and they caused it to fucking collapse. Bullshit. No, they didn't. They're very good at projectionism. They do it all the time. Doesn't matter what period of history it is. Or of course, in the case of Nazi Germany, it's all the evil right-wingers, it's all their fault. Actions speak louder than words, folk. Who is it that's defending free speech? Who is it that's behind the cancel culture, folk? Is it the people who defend conservatism that they were telling you about, the evil, greedy capitalists? What about that of those who defend capitalism and libertarianism? Are they the ones behind the cancel culture? Are they the ones trying to cancel people and get them sacked? Trying to ban freedom of speech? No, it isn't, is it? Because actions always speak louder than words, folk. That's because the truth is, fascism and Nazism are branches of socialism. They, for years, tried to project the blame off elsewhere when they are the true face of it. When it comes to something that the left cannot control, oh, that drives them fucking bonkers. That drives them absolutely nuts. It drives them haywire. Something that the left cannot control is like, oh, it's like fucking... it drives them nuts. The left are control freaks. Someone has freedom of speech, it's like boom, their head just explodes. And when you mention about the whole thing, they mention countries such as Bolivia, again, short term, they always look at the short term, folk, and you only have to look at the broken window fallacy and everything. Socialists really only look at the things from the short term, whether it was the full employment level or whatever the bloody hell it was. Nothing they ever look at from the long-term given effects. Bolivia is a country that heavily relied upon the natural resources. Of course, that doesn't last forever. In terms of Yugoslavia, under Tito, he resorted to using market reforms. He was basically using capitalism and the socialists because they're precious socialism. Because it failed everywhere else, they cling on to their dear life and say, oh, look how well socialism's doing. They're doing it with Scandinavian countries, folk. They're trying to say, look at these socialist countries. Oh, my lovely socialism. Look how fucking great. Okay, to a varying extent, it used socialism, but it also used the market. That is to say that it was using capitalism to keep socialism afloat. In other words, it was market reforms that were carried out through Tito. And what's the sly move by these socialists because they can't defend the economic central planning, because they can't defend socialism? Oh, let's just redefine socialism and, make up something called market socialism. That's it. They even did it with Margaret Thatcher in the 1980s, and they tried to, label her as the evil witch. It was all Margaret Thatcher's fault. Oh, look, it's fucking raining outside. Margaret Thatcher's fucking fault. Honestly, even the banking crisis, they tried to blame her. Even though she left in fucking 1990, for crying out loud, they tried to blame her. And they lied. And this is what they do. They lie, and then they put lies on top of fucking lies. And that's just something I can't stand. Lies, because that's the only thing that can further their agenda. And what was that lie? Deregulation caused the banking crisis. That is all evil fucking unregulated markets. And Tommy Sheridan, his fucking bullshit about fucking, unregulated markets. The unregulated markets caused the fucking crisis. Did it really? The unregulated markets? Was it unregulated markets when the FSA controlled the UK banking regulations? And the FSA handbook was more than 10,500 pages long? The compliance to the handbook, more than 10,500 pages long in regulations. Yeah. Wow, that was some unregulated markets, that was. That's why I don't even take them seriously. You're arguing with a brick wall. And any regime that turns away from that totalitarianism and tries to implement the market, they're basically clinging on to capitalism. In other words, that's what they're doing. And then they try to relabel it and say, oh, that's not nothing to do with capitalism. That's it's a market socialism. And I look at them and I think to myself, you are staring in the face of all those Venezuelan people rummaging through bins in the streets and in desperation for food. You dare to stare straight past that and try to protect the name of your socialism. What does that tell you? Well, it tells me that all they really care about is their ideology over and above your own life. That's all I really have to say on the entire issue. If you've got any further questions that you would like to ask on the entire issue, then of course, feel free to get back to me. But of course, that's really it. That's basically socialism in a nutshell. So yeah, any further questions, feel free to, comment in the comment section below and I'll be sure to get back to you. Be sure to like the video, share the video or whatever. And of course, thank you for watching. Cheers.